Hi, my name is Sandra Barragan. I am a researcher based at the University of Sheffield, and I am here to talk with Stefan Bouzarovski about his paper that was recently published in Antipode. Could you please share with us what is the main argument of your paper?
Thank you, Sandra, for this interview. My main argument in this paper is really to think about Green Deals and political ecologies of just transitions in a slightly different way and in a slightly more critical way.
Okay, that's very interesting. I was just wondering, what concepts do you use?
Well, the main one obviously is the notion of just transitions as sort of politically embedded in activist practice, but also through examples of direct action, emancipatory political work. The idea here is that energy efficiency in particular can be seen in a slightly different way to what we understand in the mainstream technocratic discourse. The idea of the permeable political ecology of the home, where the home acts as a sort of nexus for different socio-material connections, and in which there are different circulations that can be acted upon through different ways, is really central to this argument.
Okay, and what kind of evidence do you rely upon?
So the paper uses evidence from what I call progressive energy alternatives, mainly from North America and Europe. I use, for example, the work of the Energy Democracy Project in the United States. I also look at people like the Local Initiative Support Corporation in New York, the Green Lining Institute in California, and then looking at Europe, the Right to Energy Coalition and their groundbreaking work on questions around the right to energy and energy justice more broadly, but also some more research-focused projects like the Cooling the Commons project in Australia. And all of these initiatives, while they don't necessarily represent a coherent landscape of interventions, the idea here is that they bring to bear a range of socio-material perspectives on energy services and concepts of fluidity and permeability in a slightly different way than would normally be cast in sort of more mainstream and technocratic discourses.
So I see that in your paper, you demonstrate very clearly how energy transitions relying on mainstream and privatized energy efficiency and thermal comfort approaches are not necessarily a just transition, as it often reproduces inequalities and injustices by perpetuating embedded forms of power and domination. So what always comes to my mind after kind of realizing this is what are the alternatives, right? And for example, you place like a very big question in your paper that is, how might we articulate a more progressive energy agenda for addressing social inequality and global climate crisis at the same time, right? And basically, I really like that you mentioned that some of the answers to such questions often lie outside the political and theoretical mainstream. So basically, my question here is, why would you suggest energy researchers overall, and maybe especially early career researchers and postgraduate students that are still to go and try to find answers to these big questions, like where should we look for them?
Yeah, I think still the grassroots are the most important for me, and direct action in its different forms, I think, is where we need to source examples from. And this is a paper that primarily, based on my own experience, is in the global north. But I think globally there are many fascinating initiatives using also some, how shall I put it, some more alternatives, some different ways of understanding thermal comfort, also different ways of practicing both thermal comfort in the winter, but also in the summer, during hot and cold periods. Different ways of doing this collectively as well, as opposed to in an individual way. Different ways of doing this by challenging, by thinking about the systems to which all these services are provided. A lot of this comes into the sort of the energy democracy debate, through a more political ecology approach, the idea that energy circulates throughout our buildings, that they are not isolated entities in that system, that we need to think of them as socio-natural entities as well. So I think bringing in those ideas more actively into the energy space is, I think, that's sort of the debate that I'm trying to bring. And also the idea that our futures and our political pathways are unfinished. They are in the making, and there's a level of uncertainty. There's a level of openness to where we might go, of multiple trajectories and multiple paths. And again, I've been trying to bring that across into the paper as well. Diverse knowledges, plural pathways, and the inherently political nature of transformations.
Okay, so overall, what contribution do you hope to make with your paper?
Right, well, I'm hoping that there'll be a closer dialogue between the whole field of political ecology and urban political ecology in particular, and this whole sphere of just transitions and just energy transitions. And I think those two domains have somewhat evolved in separation until now, that we've had a lot of work done in energy, a lot of work done in transitions, and then political ecologies have focused a lot on water, but not so much on energy, and not so much on the whole question of just transformations and futures, to bring all of that into understandings of just transitions, and particularly just energy transitions.
Okay, so you conclude with a discussion of the potential for just transitions to be understood as imperfect and messy, and with the importance of incorporating diverse possibilities for disruptive politics and socio-environmental justice. So I think this is a very powerful idea, and I was just wondering, what could be a key takeaway for policymakers that are willing to take on board this imperfect, messy view of a just transition, but that does not necessarily know how to act on it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't really have the answer to that. I think maybe the key thing is, with all this energy democracy movements happening, I think the key question is, how are those energy democracy movements being integrated into what policymakers are doing, and how policy is being transformed? And I do see quite a big disconnect there. And in some of the fields that I've been working in, like energy justice, we've often seen there have been 2 steps in the right direction and 1 step back. And in particular, some of the biggest changes have not been necessarily through direct policies, but through the transformation of the discursive register of where the debate is taking place, but also the imagination of what is possible in the future. And I think this is really one of, obviously, measures matter and politics matter, but I think the politics of the possible really matters. And here, I think being able to imagine radically different futures and act upon them is absolutely vital. And a lot of that work is happening on the grassroots level. And that's where I think the integration needs to happen between the grassroots and the mainstream.
Okay, well, that was really interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.